All right, joining me now, Sky's political contributor, Chris Uhlmann. We'll get into net zero, Chris. I mean, it is the topic du jour and has been for many, many days in a moment. But let's step back and reflect what's been an extraordinary weekend with the deaths of two very big personalities from the intersecting worlds of politics and media. Former Labor Minister and power broker, of course, referenced there, Graham Richardson, and broadcast radio titan John Laws. You've been around politics a long time. Let's start with our colleague, Graham Richardson, the PM today, confirming, of course, he'll have a state funeral. Yeah, I started in politics in 1999, but I wasn't there when he was there, but I remember that book. We all read it cover to cover, Whatever It Takes. That was the title of his autobiography in 1994. What's your reflections?
Well, Peter, and I mean this in the very best possible sense of the word, he understood how to use power, and power is important because it's how you get things done in politics. The way that he exercised that, well, through his party. He used his power to get rid of Bill Hayden, which of course was bad for Bill Hayden, but he elevated Bob Hawke, which was very good for the rest of the country. He used that power again later to get rid of Bob Hawke in favour of Paul Keating, and again that was a good political move for the Labor Party. He also used that power for policy. He was a good environmental minister, he was a good health minister. So I think that he used power, not always in the very best sense of the term, but he understood how to exercise that power. He was doing it for the Labor Party, but he was also doing it for the country, and he understood the Australian electorate and the Australian people, which is why it also made him such a great commentator. So this is a huge loss for the country, and I don't think that we've seen politicians of the stature of Graham Richardson very often.
And he had lots of loves in his life, but none more than his son Darcy. And we know that he'd always said to us at Sky, and I know he said this publicly, he wanted to be around when Darcy, to see him all the way through school, to get him through year 12. And of course, he only just finished his year 12 exams late last week.
Yeah, and that's one of the great promises that's kept by a father to a son, isn't it? You wonder if he was just hanging on for that very moment so that he could essentially fulfil that promise and bid farewell to his son. So, yeah, it's a great loss, and he was not just a great politician, he was a great commentator for Sky.
I will say Darcy Richardson's one of the smartest kids I've ever met in my life. Even at 7 and 8, he's pretty precocious. So if there's anything like his father and he ends up in politics, we will sit back and watch and enjoy the ride, I think. Let's go to the other death, of course, the death of the talkback legend, John Laws. You know, when I started out in politics, I used to religiously listen, well, we all did, and you trawl through the transcript because it would often set, you know, the Laws sort of sparring interview of the day, it would often set the tone of Parliament, wasn't it, Chris?
Oh, absolutely, and don't forget that he goes back to the genesis of talkback radio in Australia. So he has a history that goes all the way back to its roots, and this was an extraordinarily powerful tool, particularly in the 1970s, 1980s and 1990s. Things have waned, of course, a bit since then. But when John Laws spoke, people listened and governments listened. And I think no greater tribute was paid to him than by Paul Keating, Paul Keating thought he needed to school John Laws in economics in order to have a conversation with the Australian people about complex political topics. And don't forget, when he talked about Australia becoming a banana republic, and that was a warning that Keating was sent to Australia, who did he tell? He told John Laws. So that tells you where John Laws sat in terms of where the Australian government saw him as important in the conversation.
Spot on, spot on. Let's go to the battle for the Liberal Party. I think it's a battle for the soul of the Liberal Party. I made that point very much tonight, and I am dismayed at the lack of policy nous exhibited by a lot of politicians on the Liberal side over the last couple of days, the things they do not understand about our power grid, about industry, but most importantly in the last couple of days, what they don't understand about the Paris Agreement, even commitments about net zero 2050, when in fact Paris Agreement has nothing about net zero, as I said, and the target there is in the second half of the century. There's nothing about 2050. And I think the Libs, Chris, are making a meal of this, and I think there's an opportunity, if they can get this monkey off their backs, to actually take the fight up to Labor, because I think things are going to get a lot worse for households in particular, not better. And we know that reports today that the the power rebates could come off by the end of December. I mean, that'll collide with all the costs we have over Christmas and potentially a hot summer and air conditioners on and all of that. I think that's bad for Labor, but the Libs can't get out of their way to fight Labor on this.
Well, I think that the main thing, and I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, is it presupposes that you need to have people who are capable of making an argument in order to win an argument. There's nothing around the Liberal Party that I can see at the moment can do that on any front to make the government pay for this. You're dead right about the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement does not mandate anything. It's voluntary. Now, of course, the Australian government did legislate its 43% target and net zero, but there's nothing that would penalise you for not hitting net zero in 2050. Look what our competitor nations are doing, and China's got a 2060 target, and India's got a 2070 target, and Russia's got a really target, and the United States is not in this target race at all. And we have the Council of the Parties, the big jamboree meeting at the moment in Brazil. And what have we seen there? Well, only around about a little over 1/3 of the countries in the United Nations, there are 194 of them, have actually submitted their 2035 targets. This is going off the boil. The vibe shift around the world is enormous at the moment. Now, I agree that it has not yet come to Australia. Things come slowly to the provinces, but things are shifting dramatically around the world. And if the Liberal Party is incapable of making an argument about this, then it is incapable of making an argument about anything. And you're right to point to the fact that very shortly the government has to make a decision about what will happen to those subsidies. $6.8 billion worth of subsidies so far. One thing you can guarantee is that when they come off, if they come off, the price of electricity will rise. Surely the Liberal Party can make something of that.
Even on the ABC website, Chris, I saw a report today about curtailment, about something we were discussing, you and I, last week after Labor made that announcement. Chris Bowen made the announcement, you're going to get free power, he says, in the middle of the day, 3 hours. We've seen the retailers come out to say, well, it really won't be free because we're going to have to charge you more later on in the day. We obviously know, you and I, about what happened in Spain and the overload of the grid, making it vulnerable because of the spikes of solar during the day, meaning they have to find ways of using that power in the grid in the middle of the day. We've been sold a pup by Chris Bowen. Do you think Australians are buying this free power argument? Do you think they're waking up to the con job that is a lot of the policy coming from Chris Bowen?
If retailers give away free power in the middle of the day, then retailers will recoup that cost at the end of the day. So all we'll see is the prices shift around and we'll see retailers go to the wall. Once again, it is a desperate act by a minister who promised the Australian public 2 elections ago that the price of electricity would come down by $275 on 2022 prices by the end of their first term. He now knows that they're nowhere near that the retail price of electricity is going to continue to climb. First of all, it will be driven by wholesale prices because they do rise when you put more renewables on the grid. Guess what? It's not going down, the price is going up. Everything else then rises. Transmission costs rise, distribution costs rise, green scheme costs rise. There is only one way that electricity prices are going to go in Australia. And what's the other thing that was promised? It would be green. We now know that there will be at least 1.7 times the size of Tasmania footprint on the mainland of Australia for the wind and solar panels that need to be rolled out as we move from dense sources of power to distributed sources of power. This thing is hanging out there for an opposition to make something of. Like I say, if they are incapable of using all of those arguments to get themselves into some kind of better position on this, then the problem is with the personnel, not with the policy.
Let's go to your big documentary. It launches tomorrow night, obviously on the 50th anniversary of the Whitlam dismissal. I've got a little bit of a teaser for my audience. Let's have a look.
50 years ago on these steps, an Australian political drama reached its climax. It was the clash of three men, each driven by power, conviction and ambition. Here, the Governor-General's private secretary announced the premature end of a parliamentary term, signalling that Sir John Kerr had taken the extraordinary step of sacking a Prime Minister. Malcolm Fraser's gamble of choking off the government's money supply had paid off, and the towering figure of Gough Whitlam had toppled, but would be immortalised as a Labor martyr.
Well, 50 years on, Chris, have we got some revelations to bring us tomorrow night? Have you been surprised by perhaps how candid people have been with the passage of time?
Yeah, look, I think that there's some great people in the package, people who are remembering it because they were there at the time. We also have the Governor-General commenting on how she believes you could never say never to it happening again, although thinks it's highly unlikely. I think one of the big surprises in it is just remembering something, which we knew at the time, and that is that when Gough Whitlam is dispatched John Kerr on that day, he goes home to the lodge for lunch and does not come back to Parliament and does not tell his Senate team that the government has been dismissed. And so when supply is passed, it's passed for the Fraser government and not for the Whitlam government. Now, that's something strategically that's very difficult to get over. Even John Faulkner, a great friend of Gough Whitlam, admits this is something that really was one of the key in Australian political history.